Mesoamerican mythology is among the types of myth that we've yet to begin exploring, but the patrons have decided that this week's video will be on the rainbow-feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl. Now before I delve into this video, I've seen others discussing this, and when researching Mesoamerican myth and Quetzalcoatl in particular, it raised a point that I do feel fairly passionate about, because it's something I wish more people considered when approaching mythology. Quite often people try to compare modern storytelling to myths and stories that are thousands of years old. I get countless comments from people telling me they've heard several versions of a myth, and they want to know which one is correct. I need to tell them which one is canon. Even to this day, I still get Percy Jackson fans telling me that Perseus is the son of Poseidon, and I know this isn't even the case in Percy Jackson, but it definitely is among the problem. People that read the works of Rick Riordan and watch these movies based on mythology and assume they must be canon, rather than doing their own research and attempting to learn something, they just assume that everything else is wrong. It's important for us to consider that the way stories were told thousands of years ago differ greatly to how stories are told today. To give you an example, if you were to pick up a copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, it doesn't matter when you read it. You could have read it on the date it was published, or you could read it 10 years later. The contents of that story will remain largely the same, and that's because it was written by one author, and the same copies were printed on a mass scale. I can't then just pick up a copy and start telling people a version where Harry turns into a six-headed dragon, steals Voldemort's nose, and starts pooping out house elves. Well, I can, but there's a good chance that you'll know I'm incorrect, and most likely crazy. Mythology stems from stories that were told thousands of years ago. These stories were not told by one author, and they were not printed and posted online to the masses. As these stories travelled through towns and cities, people would often embellish certain elements, they would twist certain narratives, and they would create a version that related to them and the people around them. Storytelling now has become very static, it doesn't really change. Ancient storytelling, however, was the exact opposite, changing constantly throughout time. So if you read 2 or 3 similar versions of a particular myth, then the chances are that they're all correct in their own way. Now of course you do still need to apply some kind of common sense when reading mythology. If I made a video tomorrow telling you that Zeus was actually the god of flamingos and pink Ferraris, I'd like to think most of you would know that I was wrong. Though I'm sure I'd still get comments along the lines of, "Oh yes, Zeus, the god of flamingos and pink Ferraris. Well, you see, I already knew all of this because I read Rick Riordan. As an avid Percy Jackson fan, my knowledge is extensive and I know everything. Unlike the rest of you plebeians, I know that Perseus was the true son of Poseidon." What is this video? I don't even know what this video is anymore. On a serious note, for those Percy Jackson fans who've got their knickers in a twist, it's just a joke. It's perfectly fine to enjoy Percy Jackson. Anyway, I think that's enough getting sidetracked for one video, so let's try and get this video back on track. The most important thing when reading any kind of mythology is to keep an open mind, understanding that these stories did change over time. So I'm sure some of you may be wondering, how does this relate to Quetzalcoatl? I came here for Quetzalcoatl. Give me Quetzalcoatl! Well, Quetzalcoatl is a perfect example of what I've been discussing. Storytelling that changes depending on the region, period of time, and the needs of the people. I've never really come across a deity that's been depicted in so many different ways, ranging from the god of the wind to the god of literally everything. With Mesoamerican mythology spanning across so many regions, I've seen numerous ways of pronouncing the name, including Quetzalcoatl, Quetzalcoatl, and Cuculclan, if we're going with the Mayan interpretation. The name itself derived from 2 Nahuatl terms, Quetzal being the name of the bird that its tail feather resembled, and Coatl meaning snake or serpent. For those of you wondering, Nahuatl was a language spoken by the Aztecs, and to them Quetzalcoatl translated to mean feathered serpent. The worship of Quetzalcoatl took place in several locations over a large period of time, broken up into much smaller segments. The earliest of these periods was believed to have been in 400 BC to 600 AD, in the city of Teotihuacan, where there was an enormous pyramid built in honor of the feathered serpent. This serpent would later be identified as the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. This worship in the region of Teotihuacan would then continue from 600 to 900 AD. From 900 AD to 1519 AD, the worship had spread to the region of Cholula, and it was during this period that the deity began to be widely referred to as Quetzalcoatl by his Aztec followers, and Cuculclan to those in the Mayan areas. It is worth noting that the very first representations of feather serpents that we have were carvings of beaked snakes being flanked by quetzal birds, and these came from the Olmec civilization that existed from 1200 BC to 400 BC. This meant that they died out at a similar time to when Quetzalcoatl began being worshipped in Teotihuacan. During the early periods, Quetzalcoatl was seen as a deity associated with wind, rain and vegetation, even at times being seen as the creator of the world and mankind. In later periods during his worship in Cholula around 1200 AD, he was seen as the patron god of priests and merchants. Quetzalcoatl went from a god associated with nature, fertility and creation, to one that was associated with almost everything. Depending on the region you found yourself in, he was seen in drastically different ways, from the god of the wind to the creator of all, and even a serpentine monster. Quetzalcoatl was also seen as a very important god in regards to agriculture, as he was believed to have been the founder of corn, a crop that the Mesoamerican people would be extremely thankful for. When Quetzalcoatl and the other gods created a new race of people, they came to the realization that there was no food for these people to eat. Not wanting mankind to perish, the gods scattered across the lands in search for food. Quetzalcoatl came across a red ant that was carrying a grain of maize. He instantly knew that corn would be the food of the Aztec people. The ant did eventually tell Quetzalcoatl that the grain came from inside the mountain of sustenance. When he eventually reached the mountain, he saw that he could only pass through a small hole. Watching the red ant enter, Quetzalcoatl transformed himself into a small black ant and made his way into the mountain. Once inside, Quetzalcoatl saw that there were stacks of grain as high as the ceiling of the cavern. He took several of these grains back to his fellow gods and explained that this would be how they would feed their people. This story does somewhat explain why maize and the whole harvesting process became so sacred to the Aztec people. Quetzalcoatl would then go on to be associated with science and all forms of learning, from the creation of books to calendars, to even being identified with the planet Venus. The appearance of Quetzalcoatl has led many to believe that he may have been a very early piece of Mesoamerican duality. His wings and the ability to fly meant that he would have been seen in a divine manner, but his serpent body was very symbolic of the earth, and this does create a deity that people can easily relate to, and that is exactly what they did. Quetzalcoatl was seen as a creator, but also a hero and protector loved by many. He was often depicted as a serpent with plumed feathers the colour of the rainbow, but he did however also have a human form. He would appear as a bearded man, wearing jade jewellery, with two tubes that he would blow into, creating the wind. There is even a species of dinosaur named after Quetzalcoatl, the Quetzalcoatlus, who were the largest flying animals of all time. It seems like over the years Quetzalcoatl was a great source of pride and inspiration for the people of Mesoamerica and modern-day central Mexico. With so many variations and interpretations of Quetzalcoatl, I'd certainly encourage you to share any that you may have come across with me in the comments below. As always, I've been your host, Mythology and Fiction Explained.